I am Beulah, 32 years old, and I have been working in IT for a decade now. For the past 3 years, I have dedicated myself to building robust systems at TechFin Solutions, a financial technology company that handles payroll for dozens of businesses. My meticulous draft file process had never failed us until our new VP Raymond arrived. During that fateful meeting, his words still echo in my mind. "We do not need your process, just erase all your drafts." If only he knew what that really meant. Have you ever been forced to follow an absurd order from someone who did not understand your work? Let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how one deleted file led to a $4 million disaster. My journey in information technology began right after college. I was always the person family members called when their computers acted up, so turning that knack into a career seemed natural. After graduating with my computer science degree, I spent 7 years bouncing between startups, learning the ropes of enterprise systems, database management, and automated workflows. Those years taught me valuable lessons about building resilient systems and the importance of redundancy in critical operations. When TechFin Solutions recruited me 3 years ago, it felt like finding my professional home. The company specialized in payroll management systems for businesses of all sizes, from small local shops to corporations with thousands of employees. We handled an average of $4 million in payroll transactions every Friday, serving 26 different companies who trusted us with their most sensitive financial operations. It was a responsibility I never took lightly. The culture at TechFin initially aligned perfectly with my values. The leadership emphasized expertise, respected established processes, and prioritized data security above all else. Everyone understood that when you are handling other people's business-critical operations, there is no room for carelessness or shortcuts. Our mantra was precision first, speed second, which resonated deeply with my approach to work. My closest colleagues became like a second family. Marcus, a senior developer in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and 30 years of experience, became my mentor. His patient guidance helped me navigate the complex architecture of our systems. Diana from the quality assurance team quickly became my closest friend at work. We often spent lunch breaks discussing everything from system vulnerabilities to our shared love of rescue dogs. Then there was Trevor, my direct manager, who recognized my potential and gave me the autonomy to implement improvements to our infrastructure. Within my first year, I had already made significant contributions to TechFin. I streamlined several database operations, reducing processing time by 30%. By the end of my second year, I had designed and implemented an automated payroll verification system that caught potential errors before they could impact our clients. The crown jewel of my achievements, however, was the comprehensive automated payroll system I developed in my third year. This system handled the entire process from data intake to final payment distribution, serving all 26 of our client companies simultaneously. At the heart of this system was what we called the draft files process. These were not merely temporary documents, as the name might suggest. Rather, they were crucial configuration files that served as checkpoints throughout the payroll process. Each draft file contained essential parameters, validation rules, and sequential instructions that guided the system through its automated operations. Without these files, the system would have no roadmap to follow, no way to verify its actions, and no fail-safes to prevent errors. The original leadership team, particularly CTO Gregory, recognized the value of my work. Gregory was a veteran in financial technology who understood the delicate balance between innovation and stability. He often said, "In fintech, a single misplaced decimal point can cost millions." Under his guidance, I was given resources to document every aspect of my system, train other team members, and continuously improve the architecture. Everything changed 6 months ago when Megacorp International acquired TechFin Solutions. Initially, the acquisition was presented as a strategic partnership that would provide us with more resources while preserving our operational autonomy. In retrospect, those promises evaporated faster than morning dew under a summer sun. The first wave of changes came in the form of new senior management. Raymond Watson arrived as the new vice president of operations, bringing with him a reputation for aggressive cost-cutting and operational streamlining. Lawrence Peterson was installed as the new chief financial officer, a man who viewed technology as nothing more than a necessary expense to be minimized. Both men came from industries entirely unrelated to financial technology, but they shared a common trait: absolute confidence in their own expertise, regardless of the domain. During those early days after the acquisition, an undercurrent of unease spread through the office. Longtime employees exchanged worried glances during company meetings as Raymond and Lawrence used phrases like legacy thinking and outdated methodologies to describe the very processes that had made TechFin successful. Little did I know that my draft file system would soon become the target of their misguided efficiency crusade. Raymond wasted no time implementing his philosophy of lean processing throughout the company. Within weeks of his arrival, departments were directed to eliminate redundant steps and unnecessary documentation. His presentations were filled with colorful charts showing how removing these supposed inefficiencies would boost productivity and profitability. What these charts failed to account for was the purpose behind each step in our carefully crafted workflows. My first one-on-one meeting with Raymond happened about 5 months ago. I had prepared a comprehensive presentation about the automated payroll system, including detailed explanations of why each component, especially the draft files, was critical to maintaining accuracy and security. I arrived at the conference room 10 minutes early, laptop ready, hoping to establish a professional rapport with our new VP. "Let us keep this brief," Raymond said, as he walked in 5 minutes late, eyes glued to his phone. "I have another meeting in 20 minutes. I quickly adapted, condensing my presentation to focus on the most crucial aspects of the system. When I reached the slide about the draft files process, Raymond finally looked up from his device. "This seems unnecessarily complex," he interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. 3 checkpoints before final processing. 6 different validation stages. This is exactly the kind of bloated process that slows companies down. Actually, I countered respectfully, these validations have prevented numerous potential errors. Last month alone, we caught payment discrepancies that would have affected over 300 employees at Miller Manufacturing. Raymond leaned back, arms crossed. "That sounds like a problem with your core algorithm, not a justification for redundant processes. Modern systems should be streamlined, not patched with extra checks because the foundation is weak." His comments stung, revealing both his dismissal of my expertise and his fundamental misunderstanding of financial systems architecture. I tried again to explain that in financial technology, especially payroll processing, multiple validation layers were not redundant but essential. Raymond checked his watch, clearly uninterested. "Submit a proposal to simplify this system by the end of next week," he concluded, standing to signal the end of our meeting. "Focus on eliminating these draft stages. We need agility, not bureaucracy." I left that meeting with a heavy sense of foreboding. In the weeks that followed, I noticed I was being systematically excluded from strategic IT planning meetings. Decisions about system modifications were being made without consulting the very people who had built and maintained those systems. When I received calendar invitations, they would be mysteriously canceled hours before the meeting, only to discover later that the meetings had proceeded without me. The atmosphere in the office shifted perceptibly. Some colleagues began distancing themselves, sensing that association with the old guard might hinder their standing with the new leadership. Others openly embraced Raymond doctrine, eager to prove their alignment with the new direction. Phrases like legacy thinking became subtle weapons used to dismiss valid concerns about hasty changes. Diana pulled me aside after one particularly frustrating department meeting where my input had been repeatedly overlooked. "Be careful, Beulah," she whispered. "Lawrence was asking about personnel redundancies in IT yesterday. Raymond and he are building a case for restructuring the entire department. They cannot just dismantle systems they do not understand," I replied, though my confidence was wavering. "They can and they will," Diana warned. "I have seen this playbook before at my last company. They identify the old-timers who resist their changes, isolate them, then push them out. Meanwhile, they bring in their own people who will not question their decisions." Her warning proved prophetic. Small changes began appearing in our systems implemented without proper testing or documentation. A modified reporting function crashed during a client demo. A hastily revised database query returned incorrect salary information for an entire department at one of our client companies. Each incident was treated as an isolated anomaly rather than symptoms of a systemic problem created by reckless changes. I documented each issue meticulously and attempted to raise concerns through proper channels. My emails to Raymond received cursory responses or none at all. My suggestions in meetings were acknowledged with a condescending, "We will take that under advisement," before being promptly ignored. The final blow to my already precarious position came when Trevor, my supportive manager, was replaced by Harold Jennings. Harold was clearly Raymond's right-hand man brought in from Raymond's previous company. In our first meeting, Harold made his expectations crystal clear. "I need team players, Beulah," he said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Raymond has a vision for modernizing our technology stack, and we need everyone rowing in the same direction." "I am happy to contribute to improvements," I replied carefully, "but some of the recent changes have introduced critical vulnerabilities in our systems." Harold's narrow gaze told me everything I needed to know about my future at TechFin. "Perhaps you are too attached to the systems you built. Sometimes we need fresh perspectives to move forward. Innovation requires letting go of the past." As the weeks progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated. Colleagues, who once sought my advice, now avoided eye contact in the hallways. My desk, once a hub of collaborative problem-solving, became an island that few dared to visit. The sense of professional community I had cherished was evaporating, replaced by an atmosphere of suspicion and silent competition. 2 months after Raymond's arrival, I received an email from Harold informing me of my lateral reassignment to a newly created role, systems documentation specialist. The euphemism barely disguised the reality that I was being sidelined. My new responsibilities involved documenting legacy systems rather than actively maintaining or improving them. My access to production environments was revoked, limiting my ability to monitor the health of the systems I had built. My new workspace was relocated to a small office in the back corner of the building, physically separating me from the rest of the IT team. The message was clear: I was being quarantined, my influence contained. My 10 years of experience in financial technology systems had been reduced to that of a technical writer with no decision-making authority. Harold began assigning documentation tasks with unreasonable deadlines. "We need comprehensive documentation on the entire client onboarding system by Monday," he would announce late Friday afternoon. Tasks that would reasonably require 2 weeks were expected to be completed in 2 days. Each assignment came with the implicit threat that failure to meet these impossible deadlines would be evidence of my incompetence or insubordination. The most humiliating moment came during a department meeting when Raymond openly criticized my work in front of the entire IT team. "The documentation provided by Beulah lacks the clarity and efficiency we expect at this company," he announced, though he had requested technical details be removed from my reports just days earlier. "We need to move beyond outdated approaches that are holding us back from innovation." I sat frozen, feeling 20 pairs of eyes alternating between Raymond and me, witnessing my public dressing down. A few colleagues looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. The silence of those who knew better felt more devastating than Raymond's words. After the meeting, I retreated to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and allowed myself 5 minutes of quiet tears before composing myself. When I returned to my desk, I found Diana waiting with 2 cups of coffee. "That was brutal," she said, placing a coffee on my desk. "And completely unfair." "Thanks," I managed, grateful for the small gesture of solidarity. The social isolation grew worse as colleagues became wary of being seen with me. Lunch invitations ceased. Conversations ended abruptly when I approached. Former team members who relied on my expertise now directed their questions to the new developers brought in by Harold, even when those developers provided incorrect solutions. Marcus, my mentor, who had largely kept his head down during these changes, finally sought me out one evening as most employees had left for the day. "They are systematically pushing out everyone who built the original systems," he confided, keeping his voice low. 3 senior developers were given improvement plans last week for performance issues that never existed before. "They are building a paper trail. Why these systems work? They are reliable and secure," I said. "Because they want their own people who will implement their vision without question," Marcus replied. "And because they do not want anyone around who can say, 'I told you so,' when things inevitably break. They are already planning to outsource half the department to cut costs." My performance review the following week confirmed Marcus' warnings. Harold presented me with a document outlining numerous alleged deficiencies in my work, from resistance to change to insufficient documentation quality, despite the contradictory directions I had received. The review concluded with a formal performance improvement plan that set nearly impossible benchmarks for my continued employment. "This is unjustified," I protested, pointing to my consistently positive reviews over the previous 3 years. "This reflects current leadership expectations," Harold replied flatly. "Previous management clearly had different standards." As I signed the acknowledgement form, I realized this was likely the beginning of the end of my time at TechFin. The company I had once loved was methodically building a case to terminate me without risking a wrongful dismissal claim. Meanwhile, I discovered through quiet conversations with remaining allies that Raymond and Lawrence were implementing sweeping changes to the payroll system architecture. They had hired an external consulting firm to streamline the very systems I had built, despite these consultants having no experience with financial processing systems. I attempted to raise concerns directly with CTO Gregory, hoping his technical background would help him understand the risks. We managed to schedule a brief meeting, but I could see immediately that Gregory's position had been compromised. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervous energy as he repeatedly checked his phone during our conversation. "I understand your concerns, Beulah," he said after I explained the potential consequences of removing the validation layers in the payroll system. "But the executive team is committed to modernizing our approach. Change is always difficult, especially for those closest to the legacy systems." "This is not about resistance to change," I insisted. "It is about preventing catastrophic failures in systems that handle millions of dollars every week." Gregory sighed, rubbing his temples. "My hands are tied. The decision has been made at the highest levels. All I can suggest is that you try to adapt to the new direction." I left his office understanding that even our CTO had been rendered powerless against Raymond and Lawrence's agenda. The technical leadership had been subjugated to business executives with no understanding of the systems they were so eagerly dismantling. From that point forward, I adopted a new strategy. I began meticulously documenting every directive, every change request, and every warning I issued about potential consequences. I saved emails, recorded meeting notes, and created a detailed timeline of system modifications and their effects. If I could not prevent the impending disaster, I could at least ensure there was a clear record of how it came to pass. The anger and betrayal I felt watching 3 years of careful work being casually dismantled was profound. Systems I had built with painstaking attention to detail, with redundancies specifically designed to prevent failures, were being gutted in the name of efficiency by people who could not explain the basic workflow of a payroll processing cycle. It was like watching someone remove the safety features from an airplane while insisting it would make the plane fly faster. 3 weeks ago, I received a calendar invitation for a meeting titled Final System Streamlining Implementation. The attendees included Raymond, Harold, Lawrence, the new IT team members, and surprisingly myself. I suspected my inclusion was merely procedural, perhaps to claim that all stakeholders had been consulted before major changes were implemented. The conference room was already filled when I arrived exactly on time. Raymond sat at the head of the table with Lawrence to his right and Harold to his left. The new IT team members occupied the remaining seats, leaving me to take the last chair at the far end of the table, physically and symbolically distanced from the decision-makers. "We are here to finalize our system efficiency improvements," Raymond began, not bothering with pleasantries. "As you all know, we have been working to modernize our outdated processes and eliminate unnecessary steps in our workflow." Lawrence clicked through several slides showing charts with impressive upward trends purportedly demonstrating the benefits of their changes. No actual data sources were cited, and I noticed that the axes on several graphs were unlabeled, making the information essentially meaningless. "The final phase involves removing the remaining legacy components that are slowing down our processes," Raymond continued. "Harold's team has identified the redundant validation layers and draft file system as the primary bottlenecks." I could remain silent no longer. "Those components are not redundant." I interjected, my voice steadier than I expected. "The draft files are essential checkpoints that ensure accuracy throughout the processing cycle. They prevent errors from propagating through the system." Raymond's expression hardened. "We have already discussed this, Beulah. Modern systems do not need these cumbersome safety nets if the core architecture is sound. Our system processes payroll for 26 different companies with varying requirements." I explained, trying to keep my tone professional. "The draft files contain critical configuration parameters that guide each unique processing run. Without them, the system will not know how to handle different client specifications." That sounds like poor design, one of the new developers commented. Why not hard code those parameters? I turned to address him directly. Because client requirements change frequently. The draft file system allows for flexibility without requiring code changes for every minor adjustment. This is exactly the kind of overcomplicated thinking we are moving away from, Raymond interrupted. Simple, clean code with minimal dependencies is the industry standard now. I tried again. The Friday payroll run involves over $4 million in transactions. If these changes go through without proper testing, we risk payment failures affecting thousands of employees across all our client companies. Lawrence scoffed. Always the doomsday scenarios from the old guard. We have been implementing changes for months now without any of these catastrophic failures you keep predicting. Because the core architecture with its validation layers is still intact, I countered. You are now talking about removing the foundation that everything else relies on. Raymond's expression shifted from annoyance to contempt. We do not need your process, just erase all your drafts, he said, emphasizing each word, as if speaking to someone with limited comprehension. The decision has been made. We are moving forward with a streamlined approach. Lawrence nodded in agreement. Perhaps if you spent less time defending outdated methods and more time embracing innovation, you would understand the benefits of our approach. I made one final attempt. The draft files are not simply documents. They are configuration repositories that control how the system processes each client payroll. Removing them will break the entire automation workflow. We have heard enough, Raymond said dismissively. Harold, please ensure that all legacy components are removed by the end of the week, including all of these so-called draft files. Harold nodded obediently, then turned to me. Beulah, you will remove all draft files from the system by tomorrow end of day. Send confirmation when it is done. The meeting concluded with Raymond congratulating the team on embracing the future and warning that resistance to progress will not be tolerated going forward. As people filed out of the room, I remained seated, processing what had just transpired. Back at my desk, I found Harold had already sent a formal email reiterating the directive. As discussed in today's meeting, please delete all draft files from the system by tomorrow at 5 p.m. Send confirmation when complete. I stared at the screen, considering my options. After 3 years of building this system, I understood its intricacies better than anyone. I knew exactly what would happen if the draft files were removed without replacing their functionality. I also knew that Raymond and Lawrence would never listen to technical explanations they had already dismissed multiple times. A cold clarity settled over me. They had given me a direct order in writing to delete files that were essential to the system operation. They had done so despite repeated warnings about the consequences. At some point, allowing someone to proceed with their mistakes becomes the only way for them to learn. I opened the system, navigated to the primary configuration directory, and located the master draft file that controlled the entire automated payroll process. This single file was the linchpin of the system, the control center that orchestrated all subsequent operations. With a few keystrokes, I deleted it, then took a screenshot of the empty directory. I composed a reply to Harold's email. As directed, I have deleted the draft files from the system. Please be advised that this action will impact the automated payroll process scheduled for Friday. The system now lacks the configuration parameters necessary to process client payrolls correctly. I attached the screenshot as evidence of compliance and clicked send. A mix of dread and vindication washed over me as I packed up my belongings and left the office. Whatever happened next, I had meticulously documented every step of this journey, including the explicit instructions to remove components I had repeatedly identified as critical. The following day passed with eerie normalcy. I half expected an immediate summons to explain the potential consequences of removing the draft files in more detail. But no such call came. Harold acknowledged my email with a terse received thank you for your compliance, suggesting he had either not read my warning or had dismissed it entirely. I spent the day updating documentation as assigned, occasionally checking system monitors that I still had read access to, watching for the first signs of trouble. By Thursday morning, the preliminary validation checks that normally ran 24 hours before payroll processing should have been executing. The monitoring dashboard showed several failed attempts with error messages, clearly indicating missing configuration parameters. I drafted an email to Harold pointing out these errors. The system is showing validation failures due to missing configuration parameters previously contained in the draft files. This will affect tomorrow payroll processing unless addressed immediately. His response came an hour later. Stop looking for problems where there are none. The system has been improved and optimized by the team. Focus on your assigned documentation tasks. By Thursday afternoon, the tension in the office was palpable. The new IT team members were huddled in conference rooms, their expressions growing increasingly concerned as they cycled through different troubleshooting approaches. I overheard fragments of conversations in the break room about unexpected errors and missing reference files. No one approached me directly, but I noticed several curious glances cast in my direction. Diana stopped by my desk under the pretense of borrowing a charger. "Something is wrong with the payroll system," she whispered. "The test runs are failing and no one can figure out why. They have been at it since this morning." "The configuration parameters are missing," I replied simply. "They were in the draft files that were deleted yesterday as per Raymond and Harold direct instructions." Diana's eyes widened. "You mean they actually made you delete those files after all your warnings?" I nodded, showing her the email thread. I complied with their written directive and documented everything. She squeezed my arm before leaving. "This is going to get ugly." Friday morning arrived with a sense of impending doom. The automated payroll process was scheduled to execute at 9 a.m., initiating fund transfers to over 8,000 employees across 26 companies. By 8:30, the office was buzzing with unusual activity. Its staff were running between conference rooms, phones were ringing constantly, and Harold was nowhere to be seen. At 9:15, my computer pinged with a system alert notification. The primary payroll process had failed, catastrophically unable to locate the configuration parameters that would tell it which clients to process, which payment rules to apply, and which validation checks to perform. Without its operating instructions, the system had simply shut down rather than risk incorrect transactions. By 10 a.m., the Slack channels were flooded with panicked messages. Client companies were calling to ask why their payment processing notifications had not arrived. The customer support team was overwhelmed with inquiries they could not answer. The new IT team was frantically trying to reconstruct the missing components without understanding their original purpose or structure. At 11:30, my phone rang. It was Lawrence, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "What did you do to the system?" he demanded without preamble. "I followed the directive to delete the draft files as instructed by Harold and Raymond," I replied calmly. "You deliberately sabotaged the system," he accused. "You knew this would happen." I warned about the consequences multiple times in meetings, and in writing I responded. The emails confirmed that I specifically stated removing these files would break the payroll process. "Fix it," he snapped. "Now." "I would need full system access restored to do that," I pointed out. "My permissions were revoked last month." He hung up without responding. 15 minutes later, Harold appeared at my desk, his face ashen. "Raymond wants to see you in the executive conference room immediately," he said, not meeting my eyes. As I gathered my notes and laptop, a notification appeared on my screen. CTO Gregory had posted an urgent message to the company-wide Slack channel. "Critical system failure, affecting all client payroll processing. Emergency response team assembled. Updates to follow." I was heading toward the conference room when the overhead speaker system crackled to life, something that had never happened in my 3 years at the company. "Attention all TechFin employees." Gregory's voice echoed through the building. "This is an emergency announcement. We are experiencing a critical system failure that has prevented today's scheduled payroll processing for all client companies. All IT personnel with system architecture experience report to conference room A immediately." This is not a drill. The hallways filled with confused employees, their expressions ranging from concerned to panicked. As I approached the executive conference room, I could hear raised voices through the door. Taking a deep breath, I knocked and entered what I knew would be the most consequential meeting of my career. The executive conference room resembled a war zone. CEO Albert Barnes, normally composed and diplomatic, stood at the head of the table, his face flushed with anger. Raymond and Lawrence sat to his right, both avoiding eye contact. Harold hovered anxiously near the door. CTO Gregory sat opposite them, surrounded by printouts of error logs and system diagrams. All heads turned as I entered. Albert gestured for me to take a seat. "Beulah," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. We have a catastrophic system failure. $4 million in payroll transactions for 26 companies and over 8,000 employees have failed to process. Can you explain what happened? Before I could respond, Raymond interjected. She deliberately sabotaged the system, Albert. She was resistant to our modernization efforts from the beginning. I calmly placed my laptop on the table and opened it. I have a complete timeline of events with supporting documentation. Would you like me to present it chronologically? Albert nodded curtly. Please do. I connected my laptop to the projector and displayed an organized folder containing emails, meeting notes, and system documentation dating back 3 months. 3 months ago, I was instructed to simplify the payroll system by removing what Raymond called redundant processes. I began. I provided detailed explanations of why these components were essential, not redundant. I showed the presentation I had prepared for Raymond with clear explanations of how the draft file system functioned as the control center for all automated processes. Next came the emails documenting my concerns and the dismissive responses I had received. 2 weeks ago, I directly warned that removing these files would cause system failure. I continued displaying my email to Gregory. Yesterday, I received this directive from Harold. The projector displayed Harold's email instructing me to delete all draft files by the end of the day. Next came my response, clearly stating that this action would impact the Friday payroll process. Finally, I showed Harold acknowledgement without addressing the warning. The room fell silent as the executives absorbed the evidence. Albert turned to Raymond, his expression thunderous. You ordered the removal of critical system components despite explicit warnings from the person who built the system. Raymond shifted uncomfortably. The warnings seemed exaggerated. We have been removing outdated processes for months without issue. Because she was right about their importance, Gregory interjected, gesturing to the error logs. The system is failing exactly as Beulah predicted it would. We have thousands of employees at dozens of companies who will not receive their paychecks today because of this. Albert turned back to me. Beulah explained to me in simple terms exactly what these draft files do and why they are so important. I took a deep breath. The draft files are not drafts in the traditional sense. They are configuration repositories that tell the system how to handle each client's unique requirements. Think of them as the flight plan for a pilot. Without them, the system does not know which rules to apply to which clients, how to calculate different tax withholdings, or how to distribute payments across different banking systems. I pulled up a simplified diagram of the system architecture. The master draft file that was deleted was essentially the control center. It orchestrated the entire automated process, triggering each step in sequence and ensuring that the right parameters were applied to each client payroll. And there are no backups, Albert asked, incredulous. The standard backup systems capture database states, not configuration files, I explained. These files were protected by a separate versioning system that was disabled last month as part of the streamlining process. Lawrence winced visibly at this revelation. Albert noticed and narrowed his eyes. So what are our options now? Albert asked, turning back to me. I can rebuild the master draft file from memory, I said. I designed the system and know the parameters it needs. It will take time, approximately 16 to 18 hours of continuous work, but I can restore functionality. Albert did not hesitate. Do it. Gregory, give Beulah whatever access and resources she needs. He turned to Raymond and Lawrence. You two stay here. We need to discuss the implications of this failure for our client relationships. As the meeting adjourned, Gregory quickly restored my system access. Conference room C has been set up as a command center, he said. Whatever you need, just ask. The next 18 hours were a blur of intense concentration. I worked nonstop rebuilding the master draft file line by line, reconstructing the complex configuration parameters for each client company. Marcus joined me after the first hour, bringing his deep knowledge of the system underlying architecture. Diana arrived with food and coffee, then stayed to help test each component as it was rebuilt. Throughout the night, other long-time employees who understood the system appeared, offering assistance, providing documentation they had kept, and supporting the restoration effort. It became a rallying point for the original team, a chance to demonstrate the value of their institutional knowledge. At 3 a.m., Albert himself stopped by, looking haggard but determined. How is it going? We are about 60% complete, I replied, not looking up from my screen. The core functionality is restored, but we still need to rebuild the client-specific parameters. Our account managers have been calling clients nonstop, Albert said. Most understand that technical issues happen, but they need assurances that their employees will be paid as soon as possible. We should have the system operational by noon, I promised. Then it will take a few hours for all the transactions to process. Albert nodded. Keep going. The company is counting on you. By noon on Saturday, exactly as projected, we had rebuilt the entire draft file system. The first test run completed, successfully processing a sample payroll without errors. By 3 p.m., the actual payroll run began methodically working through each client company, applying the correct parameters and initiating the appropriate fund transfers. At 6 p.m., the final transaction completed. Over 8,000 employees would receive their paychecks by Monday morning, only 2 business days late. The potential disaster had been contained, though not without significant damage to TechFin reputation and client trust. As I finally prepared to leave the office after 36 hours of continuous work, Albert approached me again. Thank you, Beulah, he said, genuine gratitude in his voice. What you accomplished here was remarkable. We need to talk about your future at TechFin, but not now. Go home, rest, and we will meet on Monday. Exhausted but vindicated, I drove home wondering what Monday would bring. The system was restored, but the underlying issues of leadership and decision-making remained unresolved. Something would have to change for TechFin to regain its former stability and reliability. The following week brought sweeping changes to TechFin solutions. Monday morning began with a company-wide meeting in the largest conference room with additional employees joining via video conference. CEO Albert Barnes stood at the front, his expression grave but resolute. This past weekend we experienced a critical system failure that affected all our clients and thousands of their employees, he began. This failure was not due to technical limitations or external factors. It was the result of poor decision-making and a systematic dismissal of expert advice within our own organization. Albert then outlined the findings of an emergency board meeting held on Sunday. Raymond, Lawrence, and Harold had been terminated effective immediately. Their approach of implementing drastic changes without proper understanding or consideration of consequences had jeopardized the company's entire business model and client relationships. We lost sight of what made TechFin successful, Albert continued. We valued theoretical efficiency over proven reliability. We ignored the expertise of the very people who built our systems. This ends today. He then announced a restructuring of the leadership team. Gregory was reaffirmed as CTO with expanded authority over all technical decisions. Trevor, my former manager, was being brought back to lead the IT department. Most surprisingly, Albert announced the creation of a new position, Director of Process and Systems Security. Beulah, he said, turning to where I sat, your deep understanding of our systems and your commitment to maintaining their integrity saved this company from an even greater disaster. We would like to offer you this new role, reporting directly to the CTO with authority to oversee and approve all system changes going forward. The room erupted in applause, led by those who had worked alongside me through the crisis. It was a vindication that felt both sweet and bittersweet, coming as it did after months of being marginalized and dismissed. In the days that followed, Albert implemented additional structural changes to protect the technical foundation of the company. A new approval process required sign-off from both business and technical leaders before major system changes could be implemented. Documentation and knowledge transfer became prioritized activities rather than afterthoughts. Most importantly, a culture of respect for expertise was explicitly reinforced throughout the organization. Client relationships required careful repair. Albert and I personally visited our largest clients, explaining the failure and detailing the steps taken to ensure it would never happen again. Many expressed appreciation for the transparency and the swift resolution of the problem. A few demanded additional assurances and contractual protections, which we readily provided. Only one client ultimately decided to take their business elsewhere. The psychological healing took longer than the technical or business recovery. For months, I had endured dismissal, isolation, and professional disrespect. Those wounds could not be healed simply by a new title or a public acknowledgement of my value. I worked with a career coach to process the experience and develop healthier boundaries around my professional self-worth. Diana remained a steadfast friend throughout this transition. You stood your ground when it mattered. She reminded me during a lunch, several weeks after the incident. You did not compromise your professional integrity, even when it would have been easier to go along with their bad ideas. Marcus, who had announced his retirement shortly before the crisis but delayed it to help with the recovery, offered his own perspective. In 40 years of working in technology, I have seen this cycle repeat itself dozens of times, he said. New management comes in thinking they know better than the people who built the systems. They make sweeping changes without understanding the fundamentals. Eventually, reality teaches them the lesson they refuse to learn from the experts. Over the following months, I rebuilt my department with a focus on knowledge sharing and collaborative decision-making. We documented the critical systems more thoroughly than ever before, ensuring that future leaders would understand the purpose behind each component. We implemented improved training programs to help new team members appreciate the complexities of financial technology systems. The most profound change, however, was in how I approached my own role as a technical expert. I learned that being right is not enough. You must also be effective in communicating complex technical concepts to non-technical decision-makers. I developed new ways to explain system architecture using analogies and visual representations that made the stakes clear even to those without technical backgrounds. I also learned valuable lessons about organizational dynamics and the importance of building alliances across departments. Technical expertise alone could not prevent bad decisions if it was not paired with organizational influence and effective advocacy. In my new role, I made a point of developing relationships with leaders throughout the company, ensuring that technical considerations would have a voice in all major decisions. 6 months after the payroll failure, TechFin had largely recovered. We had implemented a more robust system with improved documentation and clearer processes. Client trust had been restored through consistent performance and transparent communication. The culture had shifted back toward valuing expertise and thoughtful decision-making over rapid change and cost-cutting. The most important lesson I took from this experience was about the balance between patience and principle. Sometimes you must allow others to make their own mistakes, even when you can see the consequences coming. But you should never compromise your professional integrity or standards in the process. By maintaining meticulous documentation, giving clear warnings, and standing firm in my technical assessments, I had protected both myself and ultimately the company. There is a special type of vindication that comes not from saying "I told you so," but from being part of the solution when your warnings prove justified. The respect I earned through that crisis came not just from being right about the risks, but from my willingness to work tirelessly to fix the problem, even after my concerns had been repeatedly dismissed. As I reflect on this experience now, I realize that sometimes we must sacrifice short-term comfort and acceptance to protect what we know is right. Technical expertise carries with it a responsibility to advocate for sound decisions, even when that advocacy comes at a personal cost. The true measure of our professional worth is not in avoiding conflict, but in how we respond when our expertise collides with misguided authority. Have you ever stood your ground professionally when you knew you were right despite pressure to conform? How did it turn out? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more professional experiences. And if you know someone dealing with similar challenges in their workplace, share this video with them to let them know they are not alone. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your expertise has value, even when others fail to recognize it.